Cool. There we go. Welcome to this workgroup component standard meeting. Today is March 26th, and we have some really good news in that Lee from Weaveworks will be helping out with getting code done and follow up on things. And we have a couple of things on the agenda. Let's start with the KEP draft for shared implementation code and then like standards across the components. This is a follow-up KEP to our earlier case at our component-based one, where we basically said roughly on a high level that these are the things that we consider a component should have, but we need something more detailed that actually outlines on a component level what needs to be done, other than on a code level that these are the packages that should be moved to these places.
Yeah, the scope for this document is pretty wide. So I have the general structure in place and have kind of started filling in details for areas that I could find out information about. But there are a lot of open questions that I personally have. Obviously, there's a lot of special areas of interest here. A specific one would be leader election, which seems heavily under-spec'd at the moment. And Timothy also brought up that it could be pretty controversial. He mentioned something about how the existing packages should already be factored to be easy to import. I'm not sure if that's true. Obviously, we shouldn't be changing any implementation details, but if we want to refactor that package into somewhere else, and then if there's multiple implementations, put them next to each other, that would be helpful. Yeah.
Leader elections currently fairly easy to import in a self-contained manner. We do it in API or in controller runtime. I believe the implementations mostly sit next to each other as well, but there's really only, I think there's 3 right now. There's one that uses the leader election API. There's one that uses config maps, and I think technically there's one that uses etcd. But that's hard for any. That's
also endpoints.
Oh, is the endpoints one still around?
I think, yeah. Let me check.
Yeah, it's feature flagged, so the etcd one and the endpoints one should still be working. But the etcd implementation is the default right now for the API server.
Yes, if you're for the API server.
Yeah, for the
Oh,
API. Yeah.
No, but for things that can't talk directly to etcd, I think the default is config maps now. I don't remember. That's what we're
right. Yeah, sorry, that was confusing. But,
I think it's still endpoints by default, but there was this push to make it config maps, but I don't think that push ever got through to the components.
I think they'll change it to the new LEAS group, the coordination resource which is available there, the same which is used for the not health bits.
Yeah, we should go double check that, but that would make sense.
Anyway, it sounds like we could potentially just not touch this area of the code and then document it somewhere in the component standards about where to import from.
Yeah, it seems to be a pretty clean import, so.
Cool, I'll make a note of that in the KEP.
Yeah, but I think more for component standard for this KEP, it's what's more in scope to say is like every component that touches blah, blah, blah in like a way that needs leader election should do it with config maps or something like that. So that we say what is the end goal of things, because I think if I remember correctly, the endpoint solution wasn't scalable. So then in this KEP, it's fair to say that every component should use config maps for this lock. And even though it's not that today, and even if we would be like miles away from that, we're like outlining what the desired state is. So is that, do I agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not educated in this area, but it sounds like that's a reasonable thing to scope towards. So we need to have some central documentation with regard to component creation. Is that going to live where?
So I think this KEP is kind of gonna serve as also as documentation of what a component is and should look like.
Okay, that's fair.
What do you think, Solly and Stefan?
I have some concerns that this really mixes up a lot of different topics, which might have not the same discussion life cycle.
Do you think it would be a good idea to break up the KEP, Stefan?
I mean, a 10-line paragraph doesn't need a KEP. So I'm not sure.
Well, I mean, it's certainly not complete. We have the discussion item, for instance, about someone coined it our vision for logging, right? Across Kubernetes.
Yeah. So the current state is really just kind of what's in component base and already, and then going to be extended upon from there. But it was when we early on had the KSRIO/component base KEP proposal. There were questions or like comments from SIG architecture that we should do this as also a docs first or like proposal first approach, besides the code first one that is component based. We should also like document the desired state of a component, and this is more that, like what is the plan for logging, what is the plan for lead election, etc., etc.
I agree with the idea that we should have a centralized place for all of the documentation for what a component is. I think there's potentially certain classes of changes that might want their own KEP. So like if we make really big changes to how logging works, we would probably want to do that in a related KEP as opposed to a single KEP. But I still think that like there needs to be a central place where all of that is mentioned together.
Yes. And that's this thing. So like without, for example, doing loads of changes to none of these areas really, like not like super large changes, but more stating that this is a thing and then component base is a thing and then logging, and you should like have open API endpoints and whatever for your component config, and you should support component config and all those things.
Right. I'm kind of more of saying like if we decide like, right, like let's say we decide to like mix up all the log levels and add structured logging or something, right? Like that's clearly, I think clearly, I'm gonna say clearly, that's clearly going to be its own KEP, right? Like structured logging, for instance, is long enough of a discussion that it needs its own document. But I still think like having a place like where you can look and see this is where I find all the resources for when I'm going to write a component, perhaps with links out to the structured logging document or a section on structured logging or something would be useful. So like if this KEP is like, okay, and we also have a see other here's the other bits you need to care about link section, that's fine. But it could also just be worth considering, like having a docs directory on the component-based repo that just has kind of like a section on each significant change or something.
Yeah, from what I heard, as everything else is like kept today, I think, or if I remember correctly, the request was that we'd also have a kept for this, and like it's gonna say some minor things that are changing the existing behavior, but yes, definitely, like, and I think this is a good place that. So now we start drafting what we think a component should function like, and then when we submit this proposal, then we're gonna see that, oh, we really fell into a rabbit hole with regards to structured logging. This actually needs its own cap, and then we break out. So I think that is a fairly productive way of doing it. So like we start with saying on a high level, this and that and that and that, and all this needs to be there. And then we see somebody starts, but why don't we do structured logging? And then we go back and forth until we realize it needs its own cap, and we do 2 caps or 3 or 4. But this is the like aggregation one.
That makes sense.
Cool. So that's great. Yeah, thanks. Thanks,
I
Mark.
was able to update the leader election section. The major point, though, is that while there is some detail already in this cap, it's really lacking as far as something that's supposed to be a technical spec for where we're going to end up. So if you're an SME in any of these areas, if you have a special interest, please come in, and the HackMD, anybody can edit it. Like, just make it good because it's not good yet. So if you have ideas about how logging or flag management should work, like, we need to get that stuff in there apparently. So
I think with respect to authentication and authorization, we might end up with circular dependencies, because this component shall depend on the API server repo, and then the API server repo is going to depend to it, because yeah. So we probably have to move this part as well out of the API server.
it would probably be good to identify the necessary packages and then put that proposal under the auth section or create a section. There's a lot of package moves that still need to happen. So
Yeah,
totally makes sense.
Are we? This is a little bit of a weird concern, but are we differentiating in any way between components that require API server related functionality and components that don't? And if we're not, can we try to avoid weird import traversal requirements? It's nice to be able to reduce your set of dependencies when building third-party components. And I know that's only vaguely in spec right now, or kind of semi out of spec, but like having to pull in an entire API serving tree of dependencies because you needed to use some other stuff for your controller is kind of annoying. And DEP is pretty good at pruning unused dependencies, but when you have cross imports, that gets really hard.
So we focus on server-side components, which means we have HTTP in some way.
So what I think makes sense, and what if I understand the idea of component base, or the way I thought about component base is that we'd factor out the HTTP things that aren't related to serving API groups. So a component like kubeproxy that has no API groups that it serves, but still it has an HTTP server for metrics and config and whatever small health. So that would be in component base, that minimal HTTPS serving code, and then API server would have the like, this is what an API group looks like, and here are all the routes for this and that. Does that make sense to you? And that's what, and then API server depends on component base.
Yeah. That actually that description makes a lot of sense.
But just to tie back to Martin's point, is that most components are going to need to communicate with the API server.
Yes.
And we need the auth-z and auth-m stuff to be factored properly if it isn't already, so that it's easy to import.
Yes. Sorry. Clarify which side of the auth-z and auth-m stuff you mean.
The client.
Delegated auth-c and authentication.
Right.
Which is client, but it also
client
has
side.
some
Client side, yeah.
authorization plugins which are now in API server, but they move.
Yeah. Okay.
They would move to component.
Client was the important part I was looking for there.
Yes.
I'll clarify the language to include that.
Cool. That's great. And we have about 6 minutes still. Serializer next.
I have one question in general
okay.
about this cap, or how
Yeah.
we had this idea of experimental, this package subtree, where we start moving stuff. So this cap looks like the step after experimental, after we have factored out the things we want there. Do we still follow that, or after Daniel's K-flag comments, we gave that up?
I haven't actually seen Daniel's comments about K-flag, but with regards to component base, from what I understand, we're going to move already existing packages just kind of as is, that is the plan. And we move them as is, like, for example, client-side lead election. Client-side authorization. Move that to component base, and to nothing where experimental is mentioned, because it's code that already is used and so on. But
I just want to avoid that with this kind of cap, we start to make everything perfect before we do any work.
No, so this is more they should not talk about the code changes really detailedly. That is for the other cap, the component-based cap. That should touch on more like this package there and this package course here. But this new cap that we're talking about now should more paint out the vision of this is what a component should look like in 3 years, or something like that. Like in 3 years, I want the kubelet to function like this, or the kubeproxy. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, sounds good. I think we should write that down at the top. Something like goal and non-goal.
Yes. So that's a follow-up for Lee. So it's like, it's more, this is painting the vision rather than actually diving into the implementation details. And we're mentioning that component config is a big thing. Lead election, authorization, client side, HTTPS serving, that, and then logging, like all those things. So then I quickly wanted to go through the next ones. So can we please get the PR 74.11.1 approved and merged? It's been like months since I wrote it, or myself and
Yeah,
Stuart
I pinged
and
API Machinery for reviews about that. Clayton mentioned that there's this content type watch negotiation PR that he thought might conflict. And then they asked for some symbol renames, and Stuart finished all of that. So it might be ready to go.
Yeah, I must say I don't agree at all with the symbol renaming, but if that's what's needed to get it in, well, sure, because this is not just going to be the strict thing. It's going to be specially targeted at configs. But anyways, we can rename later. But I would really like, Stefan, could you either go and looks good to me it yourself, or find somebody from SIG IPM that would slap the label?
Yeah.
Because now code free should be done with 114 at the door. One.
Yeah, we're merging again. Stuart also had the global flag refactor for the kubelet. So that's also been open for forever. That's 71.491. And then I opened up these two PRs that begin to break out Lucas's older PR that had a bunch of work in it. So that stuff's now building, and cool. It has some to-dos kind of sprinkled throughout there. I haven't read all of the code yet, so
yeah. But I think Stuart's PR, and let's get that in. That is fairly simple, and the config serializer to start with, and I can review your two new breakouts from my PR, but that is going to take a bit longer. Yeah, the two follow-up items for this, or three follow-up items this week, is take a look at the KEP, and then 74.11.1 and 71.49.1 should ideally be merged for next week, so we can keep moving now that code freeze has listed. Does it make sense to everybody?
It sounds good to me. Yeah.
Stefan, are you okay?
I'm fine.
Cool.
We had this big PR which introduced the type meta in all the substructures. You remember from us in controller manager?
Yes. That really needs its own KEP, because we
exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. If we have that in mind, that we have to write that.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I think we pivoted back and we'll do the component standard thing more first.
Yeah.
Okay. I need to close this meeting, or well, like 1 minute before now, and Siklas lifecycle start with its count in 1 minute. So thanks for attending.
Thank you. See you.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.